When common sense takes a back seat to mainstream media talking points and social media headlines, it's time for a reality check. It's time for a dose of the facts. This is the John Muir Show.
Good morning, John Muir Show. It is 8:42 a.m. on Tuesday morning, and late last week, Republican state lawmakers introduced a bill that would increase transparency when it comes to Wisconsin public school spending, which, of course, would be a terrific thing. After all, it is Wisconsin residents, Wisconsin taxpayers who fund our government, who fund our school system. So those folks deserve to know where it is their money is going, how it is that their money is being spent. Also supporting this bill are the fine folks over at the Wisconsin Institute for Law and Liberty, one of them being our friend Libby Sobic. And to discuss this bill in greater detail, Libby Sobic joins us now. Libby, how are you doing today?
I'm well, John. Thanks for having me.
Well, thank you for joining us as always. So, as I just noted, this proposed legislation would improve transparency when it comes to K-12 spending in the state of Wisconsin. What specifically is it that this bill would call for that would help to improve that transparency?
That's right. I mean, I think it's important to stop and understand that Wisconsin has very little transparency to be able to understand where taxpayers' dollars are going in our public school districts. Right now, we are spending an historic amount of money, $14 billion, on our K-12 system, and yet our Department of Public Instruction provides very little information that taxpayers, parents, or even school boards can access to understand how their school district is spending money compared to their peer school districts. And that's really concerning because we know our students across the state aren't learning as well as they should be. We know that our test scores are showing that students in both urban and rural areas are struggling. And so in order to really have a bigger conversation about how can we improve education and where should we be spending money, we first have to understand where that money is going. And this bill by State Senator Alberta Darling and State Representative Mary Falskowski is a really important first step in that process.
So what are some of the specific provisions that this bill calls for? What are some of the specific things that, if this legislation is put into effect, that would improve when it comes to transparency in K-12 in Wisconsin?
So this legislation would say, how can we follow where the dollars are going to our classroom? Right now, we have a big bucket of instruction. We have no idea what that means. Does that include classroom supplies? Is that the teacher's salary? So one of the things this bill will do is really create specific categories so individuals will be able to understand how much money is spent on, for example, instructional programming versus instructional personnel. That's a really big difference, and that's probably two big parts of how much money we're spending in our classroom. But as we talk about things like teacher salary, we should know how much we're putting in instructional personnel versus our instructional programming, how much we're spending on classroom supplies. We also want to understand the difference between school administration and district administration, because those are also very common talking points that we're spending so much money in administration and it's not getting down to our schools. This bill would actually require those details to be reported so you could actually understand and know where the money's going.
And regardless, like I said, this is terrific because taxpayers deserve to know how it is that their money's being spent. It's especially important when, as you just touched on, we have seen some very troubling statistics coming out of Wisconsin's K-12 schools. Only around 40% of Wisconsin students are proficient in some incredibly important areas like math and English and reading. So certainly it seems that there are some massive failures in our school district right now, especially when you consider, Libby, that in the past couple of budgets in the state of Wisconsin, one that was signed by Governor Walker, one that was signed by Governor Evers, so this is a bipartisan problem, a bipartisan failure in this way. We have seen the largest increases in K-12 education funding in the state of Wisconsin's history in recent budgets, but instead of getting improved results in the classroom, we're actually seeing stagnant or in some cases worse results in the classroom. So it seems, considering that, it's especially important to have full transparency of our school system in Wisconsin, no?
Absolutely. And, I really think it's important to highlight, not only will this help us understand how our dollars are failing to get to our classroom to help our students learn, but we also have heard way too many stories of school districts mismanaging taxpayer funds. Look to the Mercer School District in northeastern Wisconsin that has had several years now of hundreds of thousands of dollars that were mismanaged by the school board. DPI had to come in, do an investigation, take money back from the school district. These sorts of stories should be really concerning because we want our locally elected school board members to not only be efficient with our funds, but to be good stewards. And taxpayers can't know that until we have more transparency in where our money is going.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, if taxpayers are going to have their money taken away from them without choice to go toward the K-12 education system in the state, at least they deserve transparency, and at least they deserve some sort of a positive result for the money that is being spent. They deserve to see the money spent well, as much money as possible, going into things that directly benefit student achievement in the classroom. And based on recent scores, like I said, that we've seen in the state of Wisconsin, it certainly does not seem that anywhere near enough of the education money is going to improve student performance in the classroom. As we're being joined on the John Muir Show by Libby Sobic with the Wisconsin Institute for Law and Liberty. And I guess one of the first things that came to my mind when I looked at this proposed legislation is, this is a lot of common sense stuff that we're talking about here. All of this makes sense. Nothing here is reinventing the wheel. It's all some pretty basic things that I think would go a long ways. Why is it that these provisions have not been in place all along in Wisconsin? Why have we not always had these measures for transparency here in our state?
That's a really good question, and I think it's important to note that Wisconsin has really been passed by other states in this area as well. States like Georgia and Oklahoma recently passed transparency legislation in their education spending on a bipartisan manner that flew through their state legislature and was signed by their governors. We have seen other states recognize that as we continue to talk about education spending and student outcomes, the first step has to be more transparency. And Wisconsin should look to these states, and Texas has been a leader in this for years. And so this bill by State Senator Darling and State Representative Mary Felskowski is a really important first step for Wisconsin to catch up with our peer states and do a better job when we talk about K-12 education.
Mm-hmm. And you noted, Libby, that in other states there has been bipartisan support for efforts to improve transparency when it comes to K-12 education spending, and quite frankly, I don't see why there wouldn't be. I have a hard time understanding how it is that anyone could be opposed to such a proposal. I assume, though, since it is 2020 and it seems we can never all agree on anything here in the United States of America, regardless how much sense it makes, I'm assuming that there might be some folks out there who would voice opposition to this proposed bill from last week. Are you aware of any of those individuals at this time who might be opposed?
I'm actually happy to tell you that I'm not aware of anybody, but there's a hearing on Thursday in the Assembly Committee on Education, so if they are, I'm sure they'll come and voice their opinions then. But I agree with you. This bill should not be a partisan bill. We should be really focused on helping all students in schools, regardless if you're in an urban area, a rural area, R or D. You should really care to understand where the money's going. This isn't about how much money you're getting. We're not even talking about that. We're just talking about where are the dollars going, what dollars are getting to the classroom. But I think your listeners would be really happy to hear that so many of the state representatives representing the Green Bay and Appleton and northeastern Wisconsin areas have signed on to this bill. And we think that's a really great sign that our state representatives are taking this bill seriously.
Mm-hmm. Well, good for them, and I hope it ends up being unanimous support for this bill because, like you said, this should not be a partisan issue. Taxpayers deserve full transparency as to where it is that their money is going. I know it sometimes gets lost on certain government officials, but it is not the government's money. It is not the lawmakers' money. It is the taxpayers' money, and taxpayers deserve to know how it is that their money is being spent. Libby Sobic with the Wisconsin Institute for Law and Liberty, thank you so much for your time and insight as always. It's so greatly appreciated, and we look forward to catching up with you down the road again.
Thank you.
Thank you.